Welcome to Midnight Mysteries. If you feel like listening to a horror story, you're in the right place. It was a cold October evening in 1985 when I decided to explore the old abandoned psychiatric hospital left to rot on the outskirts of the city where I had lived since I was a child. My name is Elisa, and back then I was 22 years old and studying psychology at university. I had always been fascinated by the paranormal, and that place, shrouded in dark urban legends, seemed the perfect subject for my thesis on psychosis and supernatural phenomena. I arrived with my old moped at the main gate, which I had to climb over because it was too heavy to open and the hinges were rusted. On the other side of the gate, the long tree-lined driveway leading to the hospital was rough and illuminated only by the moonlight. I could hear the wind rustling the branches and frantically stirring the fallen leaves, as if the very vegetation was warning me to turn back. But at that moment, curiosity was guiding my actions and was stronger than any fear. When I reached the building, the sight of the hospital stood out against the night sky. A stone and brick colossus, with dirty and opaque windows staring back at me. The main door had been removed, and the entrance was wide open, as if inviting intruders to enter. I turned on my flashlight and crossed the threshold with my heart beginning to slowly increase its beats. Neglect and rust reigned supreme, and every step raised clouds of dust around my feet. The walls were dilapidated and peeling, and the old floor tiles creaked under my uncertain steps. As I ventured deeper, I couldn't help but feel a change in the atmosphere around me, becoming increasingly oppressive and less illuminated. Occasionally, the beam of my flashlight caught old photos hanging on the walls, likely portraying the old glories of that institution with austere and empty expressions. At times, it seemed like I could hear footsteps following me, but when I turned around, I found only emptiness behind me. After getting lost several times in those corridors, I reached what seemed to be the common room. It was a large room with peeling walls and old furniture all around. In the center, an old television that had long since stopped broadcasting programs, surrounded by empty chairs. I approached, feeling the weight of the history of that place. It was as if I could hear the echoes of the voices of those who had inhabited that hospital. Then, a noise caught my attention. It was a slight creaking sound, coming from one of the side corridors. With my heart in my throat, I headed towards the sound. The light of the flashlight illuminated an old tool cart, moving almost imperceptibly, producing that strange creaking. As I got closer, the cart seemed to stop abruptly. A shiver ran through me. Logic suggested it was just the wind, but the atmosphere of the place made me doubt every rational explanation. Driven by a not-so-cautious curiosity, I decided to find the psychiatric wing to explore it. I had heard many stories of inexplicable and unsettling phenomena in that part of the hospital. When I arrived, I noticed that this wing had been separated from the rest of the building by a heavy door, which had now been removed from its hinges and was leaning against the wall next to it. I entered a long, narrow corridor, the walls marked by faded graffiti and incomprehensible writings. The sound of my footsteps echoed ominously. On either side were the doors to various rooms that once housed the patients of that part of the hospital, and each door I passed seemed to hide stories of anguish and despair. I entered one of these rooms and found a wall covered in drawings made with a black pencil. They were twisted and formless figures, heavily etched, almost compulsively, with faces expressing terror and madness. I can't deny that those drawings caused me some discomfort, and I was almost on the verge of turning back and leaving that place. However, I decided to continue and reached a room that seemed to have been a group therapy area. Old chairs formed a circle, and in the center of this circle was an old doll with one missing eye, sitting on a larger chair than the others around it. The sight of that doll chilled my blood, and for a moment, I could swear its head turned slightly towards me. Scared and uneasy, I headed towards a door on the far wall of the room. Behind that door, I found a staircase descending into what seemed to be a basement. The light from my flashlight illuminated a dark and damp descent. I ventured down, feeling the air grow colder with each step I took. The basement was a maze of corridors and rooms, each seeming to hold its own share of secrets. In one room, I found old files and documents scattered everywhere. They were notes on treatments and experiments conducted on the patients, some too horrible to imagine judging by the drawings that represented them. While I was rifling through these documents, a noise made me literally jump. It was the sound of something dragging along the floor, like someone shuffling their feet while walking. I turned around, but there was nothing but the beam of my flashlight cutting through the near-total darkness of the room. However, this time I clearly felt a presence around me, something I couldn't see but felt getting closer. That dragging sound suddenly turned into a more distant echo, as if something was moving through the dark corridors of the basement. I clung to my flashlight, my only source of light in that gloomy darkness. The feeling of being followed became more intense, and every fiber of my being screamed at me to flee. I rushed through a series of abandoned rooms, each with traces of its tormented past. In a small room, I found an old bed, with leather straps still attached to its sides. The bed was stained and worn, a mute witness to so much past suffering. I felt the weight of every step I took, as if I was delving into an abyss of secrets buried for decades. My rational mind tried to find logical explanations, but the oppressive atmosphere made every thought confused. I arrived in a larger room that seemed to have been an area where some specific treatment was conducted. Old, rusty, and forgotten medical equipment lay scattered around the room. In the center was a therapy chair with straps, strangely intact compared to the rest of the furniture. While examining the chair, I felt a sudden drop in temperature. A shiver ran down my entire body, and the light from my flashlight began to flicker. Then something crazy happened. Without warning, a gust of wind blew out the flashlight. You read that right. For years, I have wondered what the heck happened, trying to find a rational explanation that I still haven't found. In fact, I was left in complete darkness. I tried to turn the flashlight back on, but it was as if it had died. At that moment, I couldn't hold back any longer, and my heart began to beat wildly. Every sense was on high alert. It was then that I heard a breath, heavy and labored, right behind me. I turned around abruptly, but there was nothing I could see in the darkness. Now, however, the feeling of not being alone had become overwhelming. I could almost perceive a presence just out of my sight, slowly circling around me. Then, without any warning, a deafening wail filled the air, a desperate and loud scream that enveloped me completely. The sound was heartbreaking, full of pain and anguish. I covered my ears, but that sound penetrated every defense, echoing inside me. Panicked, I began to run blindly through the corridors, desperately searching for a way out of that place of horror. Every turn seemed to take me deeper into the darkness. Every door I opened revealed only more rooms filled with old junk. Running blindly through the basement corridors, every step echoed in that long and narrow space in the oppressive darkness. At a certain point, what had initially been a wail turned into a chorus of voices. I couldn't understand a single word they were saying, but they were pure suffering. It was as if those voices had been trapped in a box for years, and I had broken the lid, releasing everything in a disorderly and mad way. It seemed like the hospital was revealing its darkest secrets, and every distorted voice increased my terror. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I found the staircase leading to the ground floor. I climbed it 4 steps at a time, driven by desperation and a fear I couldn't explain. Reaching the main entrance, I rushed out into the night's darkness. The wind hit me like a knife to the throat, but it couldn't stop me. I kept running, desperate to get as far away from the hospital as possible. Reaching my moped, I started it with a single pedal stroke and, before turning the throttle, I looked back for one last look. The clouds had cleared for a moment, allowing the moon to cast a ghostly glow on the building. It was as if the hospital was watching me, with its lifeless and timeless eyes. On the way back, my heart was still pounding. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had witnessed something incredible, and in the following days, my mind kept returning to that night. I began to ask around and research the hospital, discovering stories of inhumane treatments and mysterious disappearances over the years it was active. But despite digging and asking everyone, I couldn't find satisfactory answers, also because everyone had their own version, and the myth had grown uncontrollably over the years. After all, there was no internet at that time, so I could only rely on people's hearsay and the few unstructured pieces of information I found at the Old Town Library, which kept a historical collection of the local newspaper. My experience in that hospital became a part of me, a mystery that haunted me in the quietest moments, filling me with unease. Even today, after so many years, every time I think about that night, that feeling makes me restless. That hospital, with its dark corridors and rooms full of suffering, remains an enigma, a door open to a world of shadows that hides just out of our sight.